Morning, everyone. Welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a show dedicated to child sexual abuse survivors in New Zealand, where I am, and out across the world. My name's Gloria Masters, and if you're new to the channel, I welcome you on board. If you feel at all triggered watching this next interview, please stop watching. Go to the show notes below where you will be guided to for some help and support. We don't want you feeling triggered and unsafe, and we totally get it. We are all survivors on this channel and in these interviews. So, special trigger warning today. I've got the wonderful Anneke Lucas joining me, and we have agreed that we are just going to talk freely and openly about anything and everything to do with her story. So Anneke has written her memoir, and this has just been published this year, called Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sexual Abuse Slave. So she has quite the story to tell, and very honoured to have her back with me, and welcome to you, Anneke.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. If it's all right, I'll show you my book. It's Memoir of a Child Sex Slave, so it's pretty direct. It's just straightforward. Quest for Love. That's the book. So yeah, thank you for mentioning it. It was just published really just a month ago. So
fantastic, and so important that your story gets out there, because you're a truth teller and a light bearer, and this needs to be exposed. So, Anneke, as we're just going to talk about all and everything to do with this, where's a good place to start? What would you like to start with?
Well, maybe I can go through just very briefly what is in my book and what is not in my book, perhaps. In terms of through. Thank you. Yeah, so the story of my book centers around one relationship and 1 year, really. I call this the network. The network, I would say, are local and global elite who have gathered in sort of a dark club setting where they compromise each other and keep the secrets, to keep the secret of their own doings, mostly to centralize power. And that global power network, if you will, does nefarious things behind the scenes. And so I'm a survivor of that. I'm from Belgium, and I was, born to a mentally ill mother who abused me from birth onward, and at age 6 started to traffic me out to what would be the local elite network. She seemed to believe that I was going to get a good husband from this. She definitely was crazy that way, that the fact that those people, she considered them as higher up, that she thought that everything was fine and that I was in good hands. She got paid also, but there was this idea in her head that because those people were of high standing, that this was absolutely the thing to do. So from age 6, I was given into this network, or sold into this network, and a few years into that, I was given by the Belgian network, which was run by the Minister of National Defense at the time, also two-time Prime Minister Paul van den Boenans. I was traded in, if you will. I was given as a favor to an international guest, and that guest was someone at the global seat of power, someone who was very active behind the scenes of pulling the strings a little bit behind the scenes of a lot of, I think, what has happened in our culture, who ended up miraculously taking a liking to me, and then deciding I was going to be his slave. So for about a year, I was trained by him. I was mind control trained. I received all this special training, which was definitely torture based, and very strange things happened during that time. Um, Definitely, extreme, and at the same time also extremely effective. And a year into that, I ended up going against this big shot, I call him in the book, big shot networker, which then had me rejected violently out of that inner circle back to the Belgian, outskirts, let's say, of the network, where I met a young man who was just new to the network. He was being brought there by his own father. And that is really the beginning of my book, where I meet this young man who's 20 years old, and who is learning about the network and about their ways through me, and protects me at first, and then ends up putting all his own trauma out on me. And ultimately, in an extremely dramatic moment where I was to be killed, he had a change of heart, and then ended up negotiating for my life, rescuing me. And so that is really what the story is about. It's that relationship of a 10-year-old girl who's been in the network for 4 years already, meeting this young man who is dashingly handsome, who is charming, who's smart, with whom I had a a very natural connection. We didn't have to use any words. So it was quite an experience. And the healing, let's say, my healing has been, of course, centered a lot around extracting myself from that extremely unhealthy dynamic. And he got me out of the network. And this is also in the book, of course, how exactly. And then gave me very precise instructions by which I should live my life. And I followed those instructions. I stopped following them when I started to speak up about the network, but that was many years after the benefits from listening to his instructions had paid off.
Yeah. So just when I'm listening to you and I'm really hearing he put stuff onto you, so he was projecting his own trauma or own conscience onto you, because as a 20-year-old and you're a 10-year-old girl when you had that year 11 with him. And of course that would have been so confusing, Anneke, because he started off being protective.
Yes.
How did you manage to make sense of that in your mind with this person who was dashingly handsome and seemed to have such a wonderful, almost unspoken connection instantly with you? How
Yeah.
was that for your young mind to make sense of?
Well, you can imagine the confusion. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was complete. Also, I was mind control trained, so I automatically connected with people, which is, I think, what happened in the beginning, why it got so intense so quickly. Which is, how I was trained, which had nothing to do with the conscious mind, but I just went from, the subconscious straight into, that, and psychic, straight into a man's heart and mind, you could say, and I didn't know how I was doing that. And it affected him, that affected him. And then because he was so young, I believe there was still something in him that was just a little bit open,
Yeah.
even though my first impression of him was that he was too hurt, that he was too damaged. And what he did to me was I didn't know at the moment, in the moment that he did it to me, but when he rescued me, he told me what had happened to him. And I realized that everything that he had done to me had been done to him.
Yes, and I
I had,
think you've kind of explored that a little. I recall on the interview with Maria, the trauma that you experienced at the hands of him and the others was really every time they were traumatizing you or a baby or a small child, it was actually them repeating, if you like, the trauma they had experienced themselves. So I thought that was really telling. Can you tell us and our audience a little more about that? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. That was my sense. That was also how I connected with those men, is to see their deepest wounds. And I
uh,
had been trained to detect those wounds
yeah,
specifically for me to be able to put that sort of soothing balm of my awareness and forced love on those wounds.
yeah,
But I did see it. And I
y-
did do that also from a sort of a natural place of wanting love. You give
yes,
love because you want love, right?
yeah. And
Uh,
you always held hope. You always held hope.
um, I wouldn't say that. I think that there were actually many, many moments in my young life where I did feel completely hopeless. And also during the healing, many, many
Yeah,
times I was really hopeless that I would get better or that I would ever get to be me again, which I guess I was lucky that I'd had some sense of what I was. But not only the being trafficked and having to please these men and having to, sort of become the little mother that they never had for these men, basically, and just to help them in this moment of their own greatest darkness, to
yes,
help them feel loved.
yeah,
That was what I did. And of course, they knew that it wasn't real because I was a child and I was absolutely forced to do that. So they knew that it wasn't real. But in that moment, that's sort of how the mind control works, that everything is real emotionally, but nothing is grounded. So
So,
I was giving love and they were receiving it, but there is no grounding. So it's not real love and there's no real connection.
would you say for them as well as for you, there would have been within that mind control a sense of dissociation so that you were able to do what you were doing? Would you think
I certainly
dissociation?
dissociated. I think they did
Yeah.
too, though. I
Yes.
think everybody
Yeah.
was dissociated. I think most of these men, many of them had public roles. I think often when they were in their public role, they had no idea. This dissociation, even my main perpetrator, let's say the big shot, one I called it Big Shot, who was an international player. Um, he had a persona, sort of a public persona, and everyone has to feel that they're good, right?
Yeah.
Can't
Yeah.
live with yourself if you don't believe that you're good.
Mm.
Now, Satanism has turned that around. So Satanism says if you're bad, you're good.
Yes.
So it's sort of in a very childish way of trying to accept the greatest fear that all these people have and that I had, that, and I think many survivors suffer from, is the abuse gives a message that you're not worthy of being loved. And then you think, now I'm not worthy of being loved. And that's the fear. Now you are afraid, and you have to accept this message because you're being abused. You're the child, you have no choice. So now you're stuck with this burden, which is, I think, ultimately a fear. that I am dirty, that I am not lovable, that I am not good. And that fear is what sort of causes all the trouble in the world. That these perpetrators have taken that fear and said, no, we are bad and that is good. That is, of course, completely crazy.
Yeah.
And we survivors, most of us who are suffering with the shame and the guilt, we fear that it is true. And so we make ourselves small and we do all these things to ourselves and we hurt ourselves because we are afraid that this is the truth. And of course, the healing brings us underneath those lies where we can know that we were innocent and that we, in fact, are the light.
Well, it's really, and it's really interesting what you're saying, because there's a couple of things. One is the abuse continues because it becomes self-abuse. Whether it's through addiction, whether it's through pushing ourselves too hard, whether it's through eating disorders, whatever it is, some form of self-abuse continues until, I believe, we cross that bridge or traverse back to knowing who we really are and knowing
Right.
the truth about that. And the second thing I want to say is, as a child and going through child sexual abuse and the trafficking you went through, I went through, is it's very hard for us, or highly unlikely, I think, that potentially we would make ourselves feel anything other than bad, because we couldn't afford to ever think of them as bad, because they were the adults, we were the child. They were big, we were little. They were smart, we were dumb. You follow the thinking? They,
The survival instinct is going to
yes,
force us to accept whatever they're putting on us and whatever that is, and it's always though fear-based. Whatever it is, it's based in
yeah,
fear. So whether we love them or we hate them, it's always based in that fear. And we're unconsciously, again, subconsciously trying to placate them and give them what they need. And so we become their little parents.
yeah. Well,
And
it's that whole
we end up.
parentified child. It's a thing. The other thing too, I wanted to ask you, when you talk about the elite network, are you talking about the Freemasons?
So I don't know. Um,
Okay.
I don't know that.
Because
I'm
what you're describing is very similar to what they do, and they are very big globally.
well, so I can only speak from experience, yes.
Yep.
So um, there's a high probability that they were also Freemasons, and that is how they connected. But I know that, for example, the Club of Rome, uh, several people that I recognized later on that were my perpetrators were first of all, I was given into the global network around the Bilderberg meeting, which took place in Belgium in 1972 in Knokkelzoet. So that was used to meet those people, and that's how I was given as a gift to this international person. Now, that person was connected to Club of Rome, for example, and then a lot of the Belgians and the people from the Club of Rome were also tangentially connected to a group called Le Cercle. So these were, Le Cercle was an extreme right-wing group, and Paul van den Boeynants was part of that. And close to, I mean, basically what I went through and what a lot, what these mind control tactics are all about are really rooted in fascist, what the fascists had already started in Second World War. So I don't know the ideology very well, but I want to, sticking to my personal experience, I do believe in what I write about in the book is that one place that I was brought, um, it seemed like those could have potentially been Freemason free meetings for Freemasons or any kind of
Yeah.
secret club.
Yeah. Yeah. I just know with the satanic ritual abuse,
Yeah.
and the formula and the procedural, ritualistic way it's done is very much what they do, and what I was certainly subjected to, and which still goes on today. So I just wondered, some of your story had such similarities. I wondered.
Well, of course, yes. And,
Yeah.
again, that's very likely. I
Mm.
just wouldn't be able to confirm that because I don't want
Yes.
to. Obviously, I've learned a lot since, and I kind of learn. I learn a lot also from working with other survivors. Sort of have a sense of, have gotten a sense from the many conversations I've had with other survivors how the network operates, how the global network operates, and how they use the satellites in the smaller countries and the smaller towns in the United States, and of course in New Zealand, and to that these smaller groups then connect to the people higher up through the children, through their satanic activities.
Yes.
And
Yes.
how that local power, that local group of powerful people, um, then makes their way up, either makes their way up or gets protection or whatever it is. From higher up, it seems that you never get anything except for what you absolutely require. Like if you don't insist, you might not get much, but you may give a lot. Kind of how they work.
Yes.
So these small Satanists, if they're very dysfunctional, I speak to survivors and their parents maybe were not very, the only thing that happened is maybe they didn't get caught.
Yeah.
For example.
And yet they must have to live with who they are, because the person we're accountable to is the person we see in the mirror every day. And at some point, we hope. But Anneke, when you think about it, I'm thinking about the mind control and the very powerful way that is done. How did you, or how were you able to begin the process of deprogramming or removing yourself from that type of thing? Because I imagine that would have been horrendously difficult.
Well, it continues. So
Yeah.
right now at this moment, I just keep noticing that I have these thoughts that I'm going to get into an accident. And I just, where is that coming from? Whatever I'm doing, I think I'm going to have an accident. And I started to analyze a little bit, and then I finally, oh, of course, it's the programming. It's the programming that if I either remember, let alone speak out, I don't know if I was particularly programmed to speak out very much, in case I spoke out. I don't think they expected that. Maybe speak out towards a policeman, or maybe speak out towards anybody at all.
Yeah.
That's what makes you, have an accident, but also remembering.
Yeah.
And but speaking out publicly, I don't think they ever expected that.
No, I
Because
don't think they did.
because part of my reprogramming, so originally I was programmed by this big shot, to be a minor celebrity in France, and then that training was very strange. I'd spent 2 weeks in a basement in France, I believe. Anyway, there were 6 people around me all the time who were like my entourage, and who were constantly telling me how wonderful I was, and how beautiful. And I had a facialist, and I had a photographer, and a voice coach, and everyone, and I was treated as a 9-year-old goddess, but I was naked the whole time. And it was to help me understand that my body did not belong to me. but my body was to be this object of worship. And so my body was being worshipped, and I was supposed to be the sort of the lucky owner of this little body.
Yeah.
And so I was treated that way for 2 weeks straight. It's sort of like, you could say, a narcissist training. Then there were photographs taken and everything, but everything was in such good taste and everything. And those people were supposed to stay with me. So when I went against my owner, and he instantly rejected me, and I ended up being reprogrammed. I don't understand why exactly, but I was reprogrammed, maybe in case I was going to break through, because the suicide programming was already there. Definitely, if you remember, you have to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And that was in various ways, was already implanted. But now I was being I was being treated in a way that made me feel absolutely worthless anyway, drugged and so forth, so that I would be basically having diarrhea, and be naked and chained to a wall. So that's, like, now I'm this dirty little creature, right? And that is completely worthless. And so they create circumstances, and then they say, see,
Yeah.
that's what you are.
Wow.
And while I was being I was being reprogrammed by the same doctor who had programmed me in Heidelberg, and my owner, and they were screaming at me that my owner particularly was screaming at me that I would never be successful, that I would never deserve to have any success, and that the doctor also insisted that if ever I spoke out, I would feel like a fraud, whether I spoke the truth or whether I said a lie. I'd always feel like a fraud. And I think, again, that he was talking about me speaking to anybody at all, just the person I wanted to trust and speak to. But of course, I did feel like a fraud very much. And I was always going back and forth between getting a little bit of that training from the narcissist training back, and feeling sort of like a little bit glamorous, and having people respond to me like I am powerful or something, there's something there, and then going into that hole back into that hole emotionally, where I feel completely undeserving and completely worthless.
Just it's just psychological torture is what it feels like. I mean, as a
Physical,
young,
of course, aided by physicality.
yes,
Wasn't just psychological.
no, I know, but I guess when I think about it, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, and the psychological abuse, which one, when you consider those three, which one stands out to you as having the most
Yes, well, obviously,
impact?
psychological is always
Yeah,
part of the sexual and part of
part
the
of the
physical.
physical. Yeah,
Yeah, and the psychological is always what sticks, because the body, even though there's scars, and even though, there's a lot of things though that the body held on the physical and emotional. I mean, the body
yeah.
holds everything, it's beautiful.
Never forgets. The body never forgets. It's a miracle, really. How do
Yeah.
you feel? We're talking about the deprogramming, which I imagine will go on for the rest of your life. Such was the power of it. How do you feel about, how you are able to not just mitigate against it, but actually emerge through with such a loving, gentle presence? How do you equate that?
Yes, well, I think that my near-death experience, which I describe in my book.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Oh.
There. That's my little cough drop. I think that the near-death experience gave me a glimpse of what can be attained in life. And I felt this absolute love, this real, unconditional, great, great love. And the state I was in, the bliss I felt, was not so different from some of the states I'd experienced in the network. The ecstasy during sex, or even the drug states, drug-induced states, or even states induced by violence, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So the state that I felt, the bliss that I experienced, it was both subtler, but obviously I knew that this is the real thing.
Yeah.
And this is who I am. And to strive for that would mean to really be able to let go. Everything else is a trap, a complete trap.
Yes.
But this was going to be, and I do believe that the fact that I was trained to be a public figure helps me to also just be public.
Yeah.
That there is less fear. I'm trained to be public, in the public eye. So it's not so absolutely devastating as I know it is for other survivors to break through. I think some other survivors that haven't been trained for that have to break through many, many more walls of programming in order to be public.
Yeah. Just for our audience out there, Anneke, are you able to, just a little brief statement around how old you were when that near death happened? Yeah.
I was 11.
You're
Yeah.
11.
So I was in the network from age 6, just beginning of my sixth year, till 11.
Yeah.
So so not that long, you could say.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. Just absorbing. Wow. Everything. Big heart for you, Anneke. Big heart.
Well, and I understand that other survivors usually are brought into the network younger and get out later. I understand that because most of the people that I speak with, it's their own families that were part of it.
Yeah. And that's often the way. And I know in my case that was the way. So it was 16 years for me before I managed to escape. But I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about as you and I were coming on here today was your gift to the world, really, and specifically to our beautiful survivors out there of child sexual abuse. Doesn't have to have been trafficking, guys. Child sex abuse, one instance is enough to change our lives. So we stand with you. I guess when you consider all of that, Anneke, how are you now able to use what you are doing? Because you seem to be doing some wonderful things with fellow survivors. Are you able to tell us a bit about that?
Oh, that work is just so wonderful. You know, that is the beauty of service, and there's nothing more rewarding, I believe, that when we heal, we get to know all these different parts in ourselves, right? And we get to break through the shame. And every time we do that, there's more acceptance, there's more self-acceptance, and then there's more integration that happens, and the integration creates this expansion and a greater ability to love and greater empathy. And that process is so specific. So I love speaking to a survivor who is wondering about certain things, and I can actually I can help with narrative. I'm good with narrative. I'm, you know, my mother had a certain narrative. The network has another narrative. And then there is the narrative that approximates the truth more. And as the puzzle pieces fall in place, my narrative also shifts because, oh, there was a piece I didn't see. I had created a narrative, and now the memories are so fragmented, perhaps, but
Yeah.
the memory, but but the but there's something about the timeline and putting things together, and then but certain assumptions need to be made, and sometimes I'm wrong about those assumptions. So when I for myself can fill in the blanks, and the narrative expands, I understand it better, and I love nothing more than, it's a real specialty, right? So it's like you have a real specialty, and you're working with someone, and you that specialty becomes very poignant, because you can then, as I'm sure you understand, you can then help this person with this extremely specific thing, whether it is, um, working with helping them understand that an entity was attached to them and that maybe still be there, or, it goes in different dimensions. The work enters different dimensions,
Yes.
and yet it is all with the light.
Yeah.
So to be able to be of service in that way, it is so rewarding, just to be able to do that. I think everyone who has a trade would like to work in their trade, and the more specialized you get, the more you like, I think a great chef, they want to make those extremely specific things that, and then they would like people who really have a good palate to taste them. So that's what it's
Yes.
like when I can be with a survivor who's dealing with these very extreme things, but I can make sense of them, and I can help them make sense of their own story, and of course facilitate and create an environment for where healing is possible.
And I think that's amazing because, to my mind, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the different ways that this child sex abuse or trafficking impacts us. And there's so many layers. There's the way we relate to men. There's the way we relate to women if we were abused by women. There's the way we speak out, the way we feel in a group setting, the way that we have our self belief or not, the way that sometimes we can feel incredibly triggered and almost taken straight back to an incident. The way that, we view ourselves through the world. There's just hundreds of layers and depths to this, and I like what you're saying about being a specialized chef and being able to create and provide, and that's beautiful analogy because it's nurturing as well. And I think that's one of the things, I think, for our wonderful audience and survivors out there, um, sometimes through the lack of loving ourselves, because that was part of our conditioning, or what we chose to tell ourselves, we struggled to be kind to self. And it's a huge thing to find that self-love again. So I think, Anneke, my next question, nice little segue here, is how was that self-love for you, and discovering or recovering or moving your
Yeah.
way through that? How's that been for you?
Yeah,
She said,
long.
hopefully.
No, I would say long
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
um the what is described in the book, an incident that is described in the book that was very, very difficult, created an enormous guilt complex. I had to do something that I knew that I did not want to do.
Yeah.
And I realized it had to be done. I had to do it. And I also had planned to die because I didn't want to live. I didn't want to do that and live. And then I ended up dying, but having that near-death experience and then having to come back. And no problem, no problem coming back. Absolutely not. I mean, I'm grateful. But let's just say that until I was 49 years old, I suffered from a huge guilt complex.
Yeah.
So it's either it was the imbalance that I came across as powerful, and certain people would recognize something, and sometimes actors would recognize something because I was supposed to become an actress. They'll recognize something in me, and then there's a connection, but then I will sabotage. I would sabotage it to go back to that place where I was deprogrammed to be, which was completely undeserving and completely, so I was extremely afraid of power because of the example that I'd had. And I also didn't want to be a victim, which once you start to heal, first you start to get in touch with the victimization, and then you do feel like a victim, and then life becomes so difficult. I started to heal, and you could say I'm the beginning journey towards self-love, but that doesn't mean that it's there. So it's just life just becomes even harder.
Yeah, of course. I guess too, I mean, yeah, and I mean, for you, when you think about it, that occasion and the guilt that you carried till you were 49, when you think about that, you were a child when that happened. So although you might like to have told yourself this was my choice, you never had a choice. You were a child under the control of. So it's very easy to say, forgive that beautiful little girl because there's nothing to forgive. But I'm not living in your body, so
right.
Yeah.
No, that's right. And also, I didn't have the full memories. I mean,
No.
the reason that I was able to overcome the guilt complex was because there was one piece of the puzzle that finally fell into place. And I fully understood that I had never wanted this. But I had to get there. And that's a process.
It's huge.
Maybe you can say I never wanted this, but I didn't believe it. And so it took that long.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, though, I felt, this was 2013, I felt literally like my self-esteem had been born. And I didn't look to speak out, but I had an interview for the work I was doing in prisons, and I just simply answered the questions instead of avoid the topic, which then became the article of my past in the network. That was my coming out. Happened very organically. Everything changed in my life also. It seemed very difficult maybe at first, but things had to change because I now had the self-esteem. So I had a voice, and this new chapter was beginning, and it was the beginning of service, really. I was already in the prisons, but it was the beginning of much more service, and service with survivors, but also of a lot of learning. I went to a lot of 12-step groups at the time, including SIA, which is Survivors of Incest Anonymous, which was very helpful to learn to set boundaries, helpful to hear other people's experience, helpful to share about SRA experiences, which there was, of course, no anonymous group for that I knew of. but I had heard others share um, satanic experiences in SIA groups, in Survivors of Incest Anonymous groups. So my whole life changed with this beginning of self-esteem, and I went public without really meaning to. Although, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. And I guess it's yes, when you talk about the memories and the recall, of course, they just come flooding back and there's no rhyme or reason, or we can't see them arriving or what they mean until, as you say, that piece of the puzzle is there. So it's wonderful to see that the self-love is there and growing, and as it should be in all of our survivor community. One
And
of
I
the
think I just want to mention this because,
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that we can do ourselves, but obviously for a long while, I needed someone that became like the model of the parent figure that is positive. And I had a therapist for a long time who was that person. So I just want to mention it because when it comes to self-esteem, even though this birth of my self-esteem came after she had already retired, that experience of having her and being with her was vital to get there.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The therapists um, that we work with, and of course, as with everything in the human race, there's great and there's not great, and in between. But the great ones are the ones that actually are able to hold a mirror up and reflect and role model the beauty within. And
She
for a
was she had the humility, she was
yeah,
humble, and she didn't know about SRA. She
no,
hadn't known about it, but she was open. And so she was, like I would say, humbly present, and she was really there for me, emotionally, and very kind and thorough.
yeah. I
She was the
think,
most.
yeah, and with satanic ritual abuse, guys out there watching, uh, this is such a taboo subject. People do not want to know about it, think about it, or even believe it. But the reality is, and I stand strongly with this silent endemic just allows a free pass for this to continue. We have to start normalizing these conversations. And if we don't do that, then it continues, as I say, and they are rubbing their hands with glee as they continue this horror. So I know Maggie Oliver in the UK at the moment has been sharing some recent satanic ritual abuse um, incidents that have occurred recently, and people are being, made to be accountable for. And that's in the UK, Anneke. So I imagine over in New York and where I am in New Zealand, across the world, this continues. What do you think about how we can find a way to maybe make it harder for this to continue? Is there anything? Are there ways?
Well, I think we all have our role.
Yeah.
You know, I get a lot of criticism for sticking to my role. There's a lot of people with a lot of opinions, obviously, of what I should be doing, but I do what I do, and that is I can support survivors in their healing process. I do work with people who are in danger, but I'm not there to rescue people. I
No.
cannot, for example, rescue someone. I don't have the resources. I have no recommendations for organizations that are really committed to rescuing survivors, and that I personally know of. Um, I I can only be that person who gives the reflection And if someone is safe, that helps in terms of the healing. But if someone is not safe, I can still offer that reflection and understanding. And obviously, I do speak out. I'm careful about whom I name, because I'm worth more alive than dead at the moment, and I don't want to be killed because I mean, I wouldn't mind. The truth is, I think as survivors of SRA, most of us would be happy to die for the cause if it would be worth it.
Yes.
If
But we
we would be
can't.
going out with a big bang and there'd be this huge shift, and all of these people would suddenly be made accountable, or at least 20. But we know that that's not what happens. We know that you know it will be either a suicide or something. We know it will be falsified. I mean, Isaac Cappy is someone who made that choice, for example, who knew that he might be killed, and he still continued to speak out about Hollywood, and he was killed, but he got a lot out there before he was killed. And so he is that kind of hero. I think many of us are heroes. That's why we are fighting the cabal. We know that we knew when we were children, maybe even, there's a reason that we're not part of it.
Yeah.
Now, there's a reason why we didn't capitulate. And that alone, requires so much bravery, so much courage, so much overcoming, so much facing of fears, let alone the indoctrination that we suffered to make sure that we would never speak out, but then to speak out anyway, in spite of that. And then, of course, naming names, particularly, is something that has to be done carefully, because for me, it would not be worth, the thing with naming people, for example, is, I know you didn't ask that question, but it's something that comes to me a lot. It's that if I told you the names, what would you do? Now that is really, if people who want names would not be willing to then go and do something with that information other than, be an online warrior or something, this is we put our lives at risk naming names. And I know survivors who have named people and their lives are very difficult.
Yes.
And my life is very difficult anyway.
Yeah.
Because of their fear that I will be naming names. So I get harassed, I get threatened in their ways. Of course, it's not, on a letterhead,
No.
but I get the message.
I was going to ask you actually about the repercussions for you. What have the repercussions been? You're getting threatened, and things happen. I know you have issues with internet, and I'm amazed our interview hasn't been cut out yet through internet services. So, how do you? What have the repercussions been for you of speaking out, Anneke? Well, as much as you're comfortable.
I don't want to give it too much. Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much
away.
Well, I don't want to give it too much attention either. But
No.
basically, you can say infiltration and harassment.
Yeah.
Infiltration and harassment. So,
yeah.
and I expected, obviously, there was a time when I was thinking of suing the family because a lawyer had approached me, and it was not my idea, but a lawyer had approached me, said, we can do this. And in that process, a lot of things happened, and it helped me to grow a lot. It helped me to, and then I didn't give interviews for a few years, and I really enjoyed the lull. And of course, I knew once the book is out. I mean, someone told me you don't have to publish your book. You can just have you deserve to live a quiet life and enjoy it and support survivors. And it's like, well, that's nice to say that. I never even considered it for a second because I feel like my whole life, I was supposed to write this book and publish it, not just write it.
Yeah.
So book is going to be there and whatever comes with it. And, you know, again, I've been careful naming people in the book as well. And there's even ethical issues. There's certain people I didn't name because I didn't feel that it would be ethical to name certain perpetrators in just like one scene or something. So I've been, you know, I'm very conscious of this naming thing. The only reason we would want to name people is because there's so much pressure not to. That's the only reason. And because it's true.
Yeah.
And since my perpetrators are mostly dead, not all of them, but mostly, since they're mostly dead, it wouldn't make a difference. But the difference is that we speak about these things.
Yes.
And that we don't just speak about our own stories, but like today we're speaking about various aspects of these things.
Yeah.
To really sort of like let it sink in. You know, we don't have to be too graphic, but we could talk about this and help people know that this is real.
Yeah.
And the more people realize that this is happening, the more things are bound to change. And I understand that sometimes when people hear this for the first time, people feel completely helpless because naturally you want to do something when you accept that that's what's happening in the halls of power, and that these people that we want to vote for are pedophiles and that they're being controlled from behind the scenes by absolute psychopaths. Well, first it should be an eye-opener, like, of course, like, look at the world. Of course it's ruled by psychopaths. What else would it be? We all notice the sexualization of children and the vulgarization of culture, the the massive brainwashing all the time. This is not just advertising. This is all over. This is everywhere. We notice it. You can't help but notice it. We know politicians are corrupt. We know the billionaires are so greedy that nothing is left for the customer, that it's always minimum for the customer and just maximum greed. We know that. We just don't know. But if we accept that they're also pedophiles and Satanists, if that sinks in, at least, then what are you going to do then?
Yeah.
So at first it can be very disempowering and you can feel, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I'm completely helpless. I live in this world. I can't go out and kill these people. What can I do? What can I do? And I think this is where what one can do always is to be open, to learn, and then also to do the work on oneself. Ultimately, the allowing in the awareness itself creates a change. The vibration changes by one person allowing in that truth. That changes things. That brings the mass consciousness on a different level with you, that one person, understanding and realizing that this is real. Yeah. And the next thing that anyone can do is actually, you know, do that work of absorbing and doing, going to look for survivor stories, other survivor stories, and then, you know, meditating and going inside, going within, not going out and doing, but going within and being and allowing, to the extent possible, allowing one to be inspired to see what it is that one can do, because we all have our roles. And the more we're aware of what that is, the
The
more
more.
effective we can be.
Exactly. And it's really well put. Thank you. That's really well put. I think too, once we know something, we can't unknow it. And for people out there who are watching and listening and could potentially be in shock, um, we stand with you. The, the reality, though, is this: how do you know you're in the right place? Because you're there. So if you're hearing this, perhaps you're meant to be hearing this. And if it feels uncomfortable, perhaps it's an opportunity for learning, understanding, growing, changing. If you yourself are a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, as you can see, Anneke and I are comfortable talking about this because we are as well. So you're not alone. Um, for those of you that aren't, please know this is real. This is a thing. And we need to try and put a stop to it. And this is one way we can. As Anneke said, we all have a role and we all have a place. And what you bring through your beautiful heart is so very valuable. So yeah, thank you. Anneke, just as we're heading towards a closeout, I just wondered, and again, only if you're comfortable with that, your owner that you had for a year specifically, um, has he ever bothered to find you or contact? No, that's been the end of that.
Oh no, no, and that is the mystery that I can't solve.
Okay,
That I wasn't killed,
yeah,
which it seemed that I should have been. I was programmed to kill myself,
yeah,
but
it didn't work, thank heavens.
the Belgians didn't know what had happened.
Did
They
they?
still, they did not know.
Wow.
So it seemed that maybe for a few months he was thinking about maybe using me again in some other way or something. Certainly, I would understand with someone with that ego, that kind of ego, the total psychopath and a huge, huge ego, so pleased with himself over creating this slave, who was so, whom he had shown off. He had shown me off to that the core group at that time, 1972, of power. And he was so pleased with himself that he had created me. He thought he had created me, and to a degree, of course, he had
He had,
uh,
yeah.
created that persona. And I think it's possible they're always thinking of ways to exploit. So if he would have killed me, then there would be nothing left to do with me. So I wonder if for a little while he was maybe considering using me for something else. I don't know. There might have been some occult work done, that I do feel that I carried a burden for him my whole life,
Yeah.
which was that through that reprogramming that I never deserved to be successful in that sense, making money. And I felt that way very strongly. I couldn't make money until 2018, when I got to the memory specifically about this, um, reprogramming and some accepting of this burden so that he could be a billionaire and I could feel that I'd never deserved it, and I could take that fear that he wasn't deserving of it and live with that for him.
Mm.
Potentially there was that occult transference of the burden
Yeah.
that I carried for him, and And it was after his death that I was able to get in touch with that and to remove it. And then also things changed in terms of my ability to make money. That just immediately changed.
Wow. It's so powerful, and the mind that we have, there's the mind that we have, fabulous audience, is so powerful. There'll never be a digitalized emerging of anything that would ever compete with the power of our mind, the power of the human spirit, and the power of the mind to change, transform, and enlighten is just endless, really. So, Anneke, as we are closing, I'm just wondering, is there anything you would like to share as some final words of advice or wisdom for our survivor audience?
No, I like not giving advice.
Okay,
I
just
like
okay.
being just accepting, you know, being, we can accept, trust our own voice, our own inner voices and our own intuition and so forth. And, you know, um, to find that self-love that we were talking about certainly is a journey. And it's certainly very beautiful to witness people on that journey, um, and then to be able to connect with survivors like yourself and others, um, that that have really come out and really done so much work to be able to be in this sphere, be in this sphere of the regular world and actually have our voice here. I think it's beautiful. But if we don't have a voice, that's okay too. I just see it's like you want, to I found what was most helpful for me was to find acceptance of wherever I was at. So if that means I am here and I feel small and I'm not, whatever it is, however shameful it seems, to just sort of like find that, like, a little bit of distance and that acceptance of that part of ourselves, so that there is nothing wrong with us. Just to understand, like, there's nothing wrong with us.
No,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So, thank you so much. Please stay with us while I farewell our beautiful survivors out there. So, team, wow, such nuggets, and I love what Anneke has shared with us about trusting self, trusting instinct. The inner wisdom you have will always guide you. You're in the right place at the right time, always, and you're never alone. Um, the other thing about, she talked about self love, and we'd mentioned it earlier. It is what it is. Where you are is exactly where you're meant to be, and you will find that it will grow over time. And finally, finding your voice. Just a little tip here that I picked up off another fabulous guest, Perry Power. You'll love this, Anneke. And he said, whether it's through writing it down, whether it's through doing an art class, whether it's through martial arts, however you choose to tell your story, there's many different ways. You don't have to do what Anneke and I are doing and be on big platforms. You just do it quietly in your own way. And the more you release, the more you are handing the shame back. So thank you. Love to you. I see you. I stand beside you. And I believe you. Till next time, fabulous audience. Look after your wonderful selves.